It's a particular honor for me to present the Minister of Education, Yoav Kish, because as many of the founders of this place, he came from a military combat past as a fighter pilot, and now he's investing all of his combat experience to improve the education system in the state of Israel. I have to say that the issue of education is one of the most important and the most fascinating in Israel. If you know my personal story, the one thing that I was willing to do when I finished university studies, Arik Sharon asked me to be Minister of Education, and then he sort of went to bed, and then Olmert the next day made a different decision, and then I was asked to be Minister of Justice, and I said no. I said the only thing I'm interested in after my leaving, the only thing I'm willing to do if I leave my university position is be Minister of Education and nothing else. So I said no. So I'm very glad that Yoav Kish took upon himself this particular position, this goal. I have no doubt that what we've learned about him, his commitment, his enormous commitment to bring real improvement to the system, a system that's very problematic with various levels of education. And I'm sure that we will hear now a lot about the creative thinking involved in order to make things better. Now, as an institution that sees it as a calling to shape the future leaders of the State of Israel and educators of the State of Israel, we would be very grateful to the minister to work together in order to do our job here in the best way possible. And as always, we are an academic avant-garde of higher education here in the State of Israel, and we would be happy to help in everything that we can, the most important missions of the Ministry of Education and that the minister lead. In the past, we were the pioneering factor that opened the doors of higher education generally, particularly law, social sciences, and so forth, something that really came to solve the problem of academic closed gates to an entire generation of people who couldn't study. And now, in today's world, with the minister, we are here to deal with the great problem on scarcity of doctors in the State of Israel. Medical studies in Israel need more and more students. We really need more medical professionals, and that's something that we've enlisted to without doing it with government budget, in order to do it through private funding, in order to be of assistance in this mission. And we will do everything within our power in order to help in that regard. I am grateful to the minister, to Mr. Yoav Kish, who has agreed to speak here today. Thank you that you honor us with your presence, and we assure you down the line everything we can do to help with this very difficult task that you have tackled. We say the best of luck, and we'll do everything we can to help. If you would, Minister of Education, Mr. Kish, if you would.
Thank you very much. I just received an explanation on how to switch to the next slide, so hopefully it'll work. A routine morning of the Minister of Education, battles with the Teachers Association and Mr. Ran Erez. I don't know if you've heard, he's announced that he wants to prevent the delegations to Poland and the graduation parties. That's routine, par for the course. But I'd like to talk about the Ministry of Education, but before the educational system or the school system in Israel. But before I do that, I'd like to talk about the higher education system. I'd like to seize the opportunity that I'm here in the Reichman University and tell you what I see as important in my position as chair of the Higher Education Commission and my general perception regarding higher education. Higher education is actually founded on two very important pillars. One pillar, that's the ability to really raise a generation of educated people who will have an impact on all areas of life. And of course, not just undergraduate degrees, graduate degrees and doctorate theses and postdoctorate. So that's one pillar. The other pillar is the research pillar, and university academic research is just as important, and it requires a lot of budgets. By the way, it seems a bit maybe contradictory, because if on the education pillar you want to integrate people who are first generation in higher education and bring people from more peripheral areas, and you want to march the entire nation forward, but in research you understand that you're making some very heavy investments that is for a relatively small group of outstanding scholars. But without these two pillars that live together and function and succeed, I think that the academia doesn't carry out its mission. And I'm saying this here very clearly, that I'm going to devote efforts and budgets to the fact that research in Israel will continue to flourish and will be dominant and significant. And indeed, we have some of the best universities in the world, or at least at a global level, and to indeed also allow first generation in higher education. And you did do an excellent job on this front here in the university, and you definitely deserve a yishar koach, a kudos for that. And we're going to continue to work together. Now I'd like to talk for a minute about I need to stay close to the mic, otherwise you can't hear me. Okay, so I'll stay here next to the podium. I would like to talk for a second about the school system, the educational system. The educational system is in a very difficult crisis, and I'm not accusing or blaming anyone, not my predecessors or anyone else. It's a very difficult situation. Thank you for that. There are various basic challenges in the system, and now we need to deal with that, and I'm going to elaborate on that and to indicate what are the most important things that I saw when I came to this office. First of all, the status of principals and teachers. We are in a world where everybody has cell phones, the parents know, the networks, the groups. On the one hand, it's a strength. If it's managed well, then parental involvement in the educational system could be a great strength. But on the other hand, regretfully, there are also some bad places, and we see how that can impact the teachers, so much so that it sometimes even can lead to violence against teachers. And a shortage, a scarcity of teachers is definitely something we're dealing with as we're preparing for the opening of the next school year. I'll address that later. And we're talking about a change in reality. If we compare how teachers were considered 30 years ago and the situation today, it's clear to everyone that we're at a completely different place, and that goes along with another social phenomena, which is violence in Israel, in Israeli society. We see this, there's a radicalization no matter how you look at it, and it is also infiltrating into the school system, and that's even more painful. There are some very difficult cases of ostracizing and boycotting, and today, if maybe they don't let you into the class, the homeroom classes WhatsApp thread, or they're setting pictures, on social media of you, and, it provides new venues for this to evolve. Post-COVID education, I don't know if you've heard about this. First conducted a study a year ago, and they checked the results of fourth graders in reading. We're talking about mother language. It was in the Arab sector in Arabic, and in the Jewish sector in Hebrew, and the results are not good. There is a drop, and that drop is also relative. It's not just that the average there's an average drop throughout the OECD. In Israel, the drop is even sharper, and of course that's attributed to COVID. Those pupils were in kindergarten or first grade when COVID started, so their foundations were impacted. So just that, like it happened to them in the fourth grade, and the older kids who were back then in junior high, they're each carrying a scar from COVID, from the COVID period. And the involvement of the Israeli society. We have, this reality in Israel, different sectors, the ultra-Orthodox sector, the Arab sector, and in the generalist sector, there are different trends, and we need to address that in education as well. Another topic, which is very important to me personally. That's to try and provide a new reality in special education. In 2018, Amendment number 11 passed. I was a Knesset member at the time when the Knesset that passed this, and the law, if you don't know, created certain expectations, a frank and genuine desire to give families and children with special needs a situation that would be a quantum leap in comparison to the past. Now, why has that led us to a crisis today? Because despite the good intentions, it did not correspond with the actual resources and capabilities. On the one hand, we promised to the families and the children. It's a very important endeavor, a completely different basket of services, and that's in comparison to the shortage in the various paramedical professions. I don't know if you have children with special needs, but with the number of people here, statistically, there must be some, and there are so many difficulties there, and we must do some revisiting, some long-term revisiting on this issue. And the last point, of course, I have to mention the gaps, and that's also not news. You know, it's not that I'm the first Minister of Education who talks about the gaps between the periphery of Israel and the center of Israel. If we look at the graphs of the OECD, and you can see when in doing comparisons that the difference, the gap between our better students, the stronger layer, the stronger stratum, to the lower one, to the weakest one, the gap, the difference is the highest in the OECD. There were some attempts to overcome this, to resolve this, but unfortunately, we still suffer from some significant differences between the periphery and the center. What about the issue or the status of teachers and principals? One thing you need to know about education, doesn't matter what you do, or whatever you do, without good teachers, you won't be able to provide good education. The main anchor that allows you to take the children to growth is the teacher in the classroom. And this event, this is a situation that many countries in the world are experiencing, a shortage of teachers. This is something that almost every Western country faces today, and strengthening teacher status, that's critical, and it has to do, of course, with a salary, and we've improved their salaries. The salaries are being increased, and we're going to continue to up their wages, but it's not just that. It's not just the wages. It's also professional development. On the subject of professional development, we are leading programs that a teacher, the challenge of a teacher won't only be to teach the classroom, but beyond that, to lead some systemic thinking with various programs that we can mark the teachers who are truly leading change, and to replicate this model in other schools, and to provide the teachers with professional development as well as principals. The principals are suffering from a lot of bureaucracy. The Hagefen program, I don't know if you've heard about it, it's a basket of services with which they can manage all the additional training that they want to, that it won't be dictated to them. But because it's relatively new, it's been introduced in recent years, it still suffers from a lot of lack of flexibility. We're improving that, and we are enabling some significant changes that will give them that flexibility that we want to give them. Prevention of violence, we've defined this as one of our main goals in the Ministry of Education, and we're focusing a lot of effort on that, whether it's increasing consulting and counselors in schools. We didn't have enough counselors, we didn't have enough counseling hours, and we're doing that through roundtables with parents and with pupils, trying to find additional responses and trying to mobilize as many partners to this goal as possible. If not this week, then next week, there's going to be a Director General's circular that will also add a lot of tools for teachers and principals to deal with violence. And there's a special point I wish to emphasize. It's a change from the past in the policy of the Ministry of Education. And this is a challenge that every school principal faces. When a principal encounters violence, a violent situation, does the principal need to contain them, or is it beyond containment? And in order to protect all the others, they need to distance the pupil from school. And the policy has almost always been containment. I gave a clear instruction to change that, and maybe we're going to pay a price in certain cases. There will be such cases because we're talking about a large system, but the message has to be that at the end of the day, if the principal thinks that he cannot continue with that situation, the principal will receive backing, and that child will be expelled from the school, and the principal will receive backing and support for that. Before that, it was very difficult to do so. The complexity of the Israeli society, that's probably not news to the people in this room. There are some issues that are definitely a major challenge for the school system, for the educational system. Let's start with the periphery. We've defined this as a goal. We are investing over 100 million in the upcoming budget that will be dedicated to that. And what we're going to do, it's this upside pyramid. When we have a classroom with 30 to 35 children, 80 to 85%, according to studies, can advance with the pace of the classroom, and that leaves you with a segment of about 10 pupils, or maybe less, maybe 7 or 8, that are facing difficulties, and we want to strengthen them. We're going to give them focused support in these classrooms. We are going to give them a boost in school hours and in other additional support in order and tutorship. And Reichman talked about something else, to focus on the most difficult places. Well, we are doing that to a certain extent. We're going to those schools, to those difficult classrooms, trying to push this ahead. Another issue, we need to pay attention to the age in which you start addressing this, because once you reach high school, if there's a gap, and there is a gap, it's very difficult to close that gap. The earlier you identify the development of such a gap and you help them, the gap in high school will be much smaller. At the first stage, when you identify these gaps in the school system as well, it's usually the third grade, because in the third grade you can see the differences in the level of mother language, which child can truly express themselves and who can't do it so well. And you need to provide help already at that age so that you can reduce the gap once the child reaches the end of elementary school, and also to continue and work on it in middle school and junior high, not to wait for high school, but approximately around 8th grade, to see where the pupil is at, where there are significant gaps in the important subject matters such as math, English, etc., so that they reach high school with as many achievements as possible. The challenges of the different sectors, of course, the Haredi Jews, the ultra-Orthodox Jews, that's at the heart of Israeli public discourse, and I can tell you that the education system, the budget it gives the ultra-Orthodox Jews is based on 3 different criteria. It's based on the level of involvement. There's the 100%, and that happens in the school chains of the ultra-Orthodox schools where they teach core studies and are supervised. They receive 100% budgeting just like any other Israeli student in the national school system. And there are 2 other places, and it's a political question. Will you force them to study these core subject matters or not? Let's not address that. Where we do have supervision, but they don't significantly teach core subject matters, it's 85%, and there are the exempt schools that they receive 55% budget for each student, and we have no supervision, no oversight over them. What happened now? Because there was long-standing erosion in these percentages, we have the OFIC program for teachers, and it compensates teachers based on the hours they teach and their knowledge and their wages level, and they didn't receive that in the ultra-Orthodox sector. Now that we are giving them the OFIC program, it's for the first time now, we're receiving information about the teachers, their hours, their education, and this enables us to make some oversight, to supervise them. So we are equating the terms, and it's still based on that breakdown I just explained. That hasn't changed, but we receive a lot of information about the activities in the schools, and we didn't have that before. And the only way to get them moving forward is in this method, to truly understand where we can strengthen the connections. And ultimately, the question remains open, how much you try and how you try to integrate core study subject matters. But now that we are equating the conditions, it's already significantly, because now in the Ministry of Education, I'll know more data about things I didn't know before. Now, the issue of diminishing gaps between the center and periphery, we mustn't, give up on the top layer of excellence, because it pulls the entire system forward, and it's the basis for the most dramatic measures that have happened to us in higher education and will continue to happen, and I'll talk about that later. And today, when we talk about the school system, the education system, it's from age 0 to the academia as one whole continuum. And I talked about the higher education, and there's the issue of first generation in higher education. We're going to invest quite a lot in that in order to encourage the academic institutions to integrate this first generation into academia. I see that I only have a few minutes left, so I'll begin to accelerate. I apologize if I speak too quickly. As for special education, we are providing a response, first of all, to the more urgent matters. That's on the first stage, but there's the Shapira Committee. I don't know if you know Amos Shapira. He's a very serious man. He was the director, the CEO of El Al. I was a pilot in El Al, but he was CEO before that. I didn't know him when I worked in El Al. He is a professional CEO who understands about resources and how to respond to needs. But on the one hand, he was the chairman of Alut, so he's very much familiar with this subject of families with children with special needs. The committee will start on June 1st. They've already met several times, and they need to see how they examine long-term special education, both in the mid-range and long-term as well. The next generation, in one word, like I said, we are facing a crisis situation. We're going to come out of that crisis. We're going to march forward, and I'm here to be Minister of Education not for 1 year, not for 2 years, hopefully for one term of office, perhaps even 2. I see it as a true vocation. So where are we heading? This is very, very important nowadays, digital, and to incorporate tools that doesn't exist as of now. We've already started this. The subject of AI, artificial intelligence, will have such a dramatic impact on the entire school system. I was Deputy Minister of Health, and in health, it's even easier to understand where AI is going. We have mass data. It's personalized, patient-centric. You can index a person, utilize AI, and then get some very good results. And in education, the challenge is much greater, because when you're in education, you can use one type of AI. For us as teachers and principals to receive aggregate information and to try and figure out what's happening in the classroom. But the question is, how do you use it for teaching? How do you generate tools that will help teaching and giving knowledge? We still don't know much about this, but definitely here in Israel we have a very strong basis of knowledge on AI, and we're going to benefit from that in the educational system as well. Another new project that we are leading is to have digital courses for 11th and 12th graders. The students will view it. The teacher will be like a moderator, and then they'll take either a computerized test or in the academia. And if they pass the test, it gives them credit points for their degree later. That's very important, and this will help, bring a first generation to higher education. I'm not talking about a very small percentage, 1 or 2% of high school students who are starting their university degrees while in high school. And okay, so I've already talked about technology, and I'd like to finish. I'm taking 1 minute extra, and that at the end of the day, when we look at a graduate of the Israeli school system, it's not just knowledge and technology in academia and innovation. It's much more. It's values, it's leadership, it's the informal activity after school hours. It's to give graduates who have an understanding of their identity. And when I talk about identity, I'm not ashamed to say Jewish identity, Arab identity. They can each establish their identity, and we're pluralistic. We can take a broader approach, but part of your strength as a graduate to understand who you are, what your connection to the place you live is, to invest in society and in your surroundings, and to do everything you can in order to create a better future for the State of Israel. Thank you very much.